Money is created through a process that I call the Mandrake mechanism. Now that goes back to the 1940s when there was a popular comic book character by the name of Mandrake the Magician. He was quite a guy. He had this big black cape and he could wave it around and things would disappear, and then he'd wave it again and they would reappear. He was quite a magician. And I got to thinking about how money comes into being and how it's extinguished in the United States and much of the rest of the world, for that matter. I thought, aha, that's the Mandrake mechanism. It's magic is what it is. And it really is. It's accounting magic. Here's how it works. Now, I'm going to make this very simple, but technically it's totally accurate. It starts with Congress. Remember, a moment ago I said that the Federal Reserve System was a partnership between a cartel and the federal government. Well, if there's a partnership, there's a reason for the partners, both of them, to be in it, or they wouldn't be. So the question is, why is the banking fraternity in this partnership, and why are the politicians in it? And that is answered by understanding how money comes into being. So it starts with Congress, or the government side of the partnership. Congress needs more money. They always need more money. They like to spend money. That gets them elected. They don't like to raise taxes because that gets them unelected. So congressmen and senators are always balancing this choice between how do we give more benefits, how do we buy more votes with the taxpayers' money without raising their taxes. And it's a perennial problem. And the politicians get pretty good at this mechanism. The answer, of course, is that they borrow it. If you're not going to tax it from somebody, you can borrow it from somebody else. That sounds very well and good, and that's why we have government bonds and treasury notes and bills and so forth, and we have what's called the national debt, because they've borrowed money to pay for current expenses that they don't want to pay for through taxes, because that would be unpopular. Well, fine as far as it goes, but when you borrow money, eventually you have to pay it back. See? So 30 days after they borrowed $1 billion, or 60 days, whatever the term of the loan is, or a year, they have to pay that money back. Well, lo and behold, it turns out that the congressmen and the senators are still not taking in as much money in taxes as they are spending in benefits, so they don't have the money to repay the loan. So what do? Easy. Borrow some more. Borrow enough to pay back the original loan, plus a little bit more to keep them in office, keep them with the image of the big spenders. So this process goes on and on and on, and that's why we have the national debt growing and growing and growing. So far, so good. If you borrow money from somebody who has the money, you don't really increase the money supply. All you're doing is just taking it from one person and promising to pay back interest on it. But the money supply doesn't increase. The Federal Reserve enters the picture at this stage because, you see, they can never borrow enough from the private sector. There's never enough existing money out there for the politicians to borrow without having to raise the interest rate very, very high to attract it, which is also politically unpopular. So they don't want to do that either. So what do? They go to the Federal Reserve System, and by agreement, remember this is their partner now in this agreement, the Federal Reserve System agrees literally to create the money that they're going to lend to the government. It's not really a lending at all, as you can see, but they use the old traditional words of lending it to the government, when in fact all they're doing is just printing it for the government. They're creating it for the government, and then they call it a loan. Of course, they don't print it all because most of it's checkbook money, but nevertheless, the process is the same as if they had just turned on the printing presses and printed all this money and gave it to the federal government. And then they were going to loan it to the federal government and charge the government an interest on it, and that's a misnomer either. What they should really say is, we've created it for the federal government, and now we want a service charge. That's an accurate understanding of what is really going on. But instead, they confuse it by saying that it's a loan and interest. So now, once the Federal Reserve System creates this money out of nothing, literally, it's fresh money into the society, into the economy, and that's how the money supply keeps growing and growing and growing. Now, that's just the beginning, though. Now, most people are alarmed when they hear about the fact that the Fed can create money out of nothing and charge interest on it, so-called interest. But that's just the beginning of the story. Let's follow that money and see where it goes. Remember, there's another partner in this thing. We've only looked at the government partner. What about the banking partner? What's in it for them? So let's follow the money and find out. Let's say, for example, that our postal delivery guy gets a $1,000 check from the federal government. Now, that's money that was created out of nothing by the Federal Reserve System. He doesn't know that. To him, it's perfectly good. It's a check. It's a government check. He can spend it. So he takes it down to his private bank, his commercial bank, and he deposits it into his private checking account. Now the money suddenly is out of the government cycle, the government side of this, and into the commercial banking side of it. Now this is where the action really heats up. If I were a banker and you were the postal delivery man, and you came into my bank with your $1,000 check and you deposited it into my bank, into your account, I could go to the front of the bank and address everybody in the room there, and I could say, attention everybody, this fine gentleman here has just deposited $1,000 into our venerable bank. And now we have money to loan. And everybody would be happy because they know that many of them are there to borrow money, and they know that the more money there is to loan, that usually means the lower the interest rates are. So they're all happy. So some fellow over here says, well, how much did he deposit? And I said, well, $1,000. And he might say, well, that's not enough. I want to borrow $9,000 because I'm looking at this used car over here, and I need to borrow $9,000, but you've only got $1,000. I would then say, don't worry about it, sir. I can lend you $9,000. And he would say, where did the other 8 come from? And I would have to say, don't worry about it, sir. These things are more complicated than you can imagine, and you don't need to know these things. I can lend you the $9,000, and in fact, I can if I'm a banker. For every dollar, or every $1 billion that's put into the banks through the circle we just talked about, I, as a commercial banker, can create an additional $9 billion and push them out into the economy as loans. Now that $9 billion based on the $1 billion, which itself was created out of nothing, that was the foundation. That was the one that they gave to the government, that billion. Now that $9 billion comes into the commercial banks, and the banks now can create an additional $9 billion on top of the $1 billion. All of it is just fiat money. It's created out of nothing, but the commercial banks get the bigger end of the deal, as you can see. They can create 9 for the private sector called loans, and these are genuine loans, and that is where our money comes from. That is how money is created. Every bit of it is created in this fashion. If we were to take away all of the loans, if all of the loans in the world would be repaid, there wouldn't be one red penny in circulation in the United States of America. It would all disappear back into the computer chips and into the vaults. There would be no money in circulation. Every bit of it is based upon debt, and that debt creates money that literally has nothing behind it at all. Now this is how money is created in the Western world. And it's an amazing story, and only a few people, even within the banking industry, really understand it. I've talked to many people who work in the banks, and they read my book and they say, gee, I didn't know that. All they know is how to keep the numbers balanced in the columns and how to fill out the application for loans. They all have a job to do. Only a very few people at the top know how money really comes into existence. The creation of money out of nothing has had a devastating impact on the purchasing power of the American dollar. I might add, this process is happening to all currencies in the world that adopt this process, and that's most of them in the Western world. So what I'm saying about the American dollar also applies to most currencies in the world which have the ability to create money out of nothing, which they've given to their central banks. When you give men the power to create money out of nothing, you shouldn't be surprised if they turn around and create money out of nothing, because that's what they're supposed to do. Now, the underlying philosophy is that, well, we'll be very conservative about it. We won't run rampant. We won't abuse this power, would we, for our own personal gain or our political advantage? Heavens no, we would never do that. We are wise and wonderful people, and you can trust us, they say. So we give them blindly this power to create money out of nothing because we trust them to use this power wisely. Nowhere in history has this ever been a justified trust. Every time man has had that power, and this started back in antiquity, those with the power have abused it, and they have created more and more and more money at a rate much faster than the expansion of goods and services which are being produced by the productive side of the economy. Now, if the goods and services were growing at a rate which is exactly the same as the money supply, then the purchasing power of the monetary unit would remain constant. And in fact, it has happened that way wherever men have not had the power to create money out of nothing. For example, when money was based on monetary units like gold or silver, it's interesting, I think, to know that in ancient Rome, if you had a 1-ounce gold coin, that would be the cost of a nice toga, a handcrafted belt, and a pair of sandals. Today, thousands of years later, if you have a 1-ounce gold coin with no numismatic or collector's value to it, just a cougaran or a bullion coin of some kind, and you convert that into Federal Reserve notes, you can walk into a store and buy a nice suit, a handcrafted belt, and a pair of shoes. The real price of those items, and all items for that matter, throughout history, does not change when measured in terms of something of intrinsic value, such as gold or silver, because those things take human effort to produce as well as the belt, the toga, and the sandals. Both of them take human effort to produce, and that's why they maintain value with each other. But once you break that away, and you give men the power to expand the money supply without that discipline, they're going to expand the money supply faster than the increase in goods and services. And then you're going to have this difference in purchasing power. We call it inflation. And inflation, I think, is a bad word because really we think of inflation as rising prices. But in reality, what's happening, prices are not going up. It's that the value of the dollar or the monetary unit is going down. That's what's really happening if we understand the process. And it's a tax, therefore. Our lost purchasing power, what we have to pay more for a bag of groceries today than we did 5 years ago, comes out of our pocket, comes out of our earning capacity. That is value which we should have, but it's been taken from us through a process that we call inflation, but in reality it's a hidden tax. It's a tax that is more vicious than any other tax you can imagine. There are no exemptions, no deductions. And those with the least amount of money pay it to the highest degree. I mean, it's the most unfair, most unjust tax you can imagine. And that is what inflation is. Inflation is the result of being able to create money out of nothing. And that is the power we have given to the Federal Reserve System. Therefore, we can say that the Federal Reserve System is the agency of a hidden tax called inflation. I feel that our paper currency must eventually be backed by gold or silver if we are to have an economy that will protect the purchasing power of the common man. We must have it furthermore to protect our freedoms, because if we lose our economy, if we become totally dependent economically upon the state, then we've lost our freedom. We become vassals of the state. And all of this can be traced back to the fact that our monetary unit is completely valueless, or let's say it is valued only at the whim of our leaders. And that is a very precarious position to be in. I don't think anybody, if they thought it through, would ever say, that's the system I want, and yet that's the system we have.